Welcome to 2022. I know you probably were already inundated with forecasts, so I hope this will add insights and practical informations about what this year's about and how to best move forward. So this is the year of the tiger, also in Chinese astrology, and this new year of the water tiger will begin in February. But here we focus on Western astrology. My name is Maurice Fernandez. My focus is on evolutionary astrology. And you can check everything about my work on my website, mauricefernandez.com. Moving to the new year, I wanted to share with you some of the exciting plans before we get into the forecast. So I will be teaching extensively this year, starting with an astronomy for astrologers workshop in March. Then we have an incredible astrology conference, which is both online and in person, called Astrology. And this is a game changer for those who are practicing astrology. Check it out. We'll be in Australia in the month of August, speaking and teaching a full seminar about transits, a chart interpretation workshop in the beautiful Red Rocks of Sedona. Then I will be teaching an astrology event at Omega Institute in New York, upstate New York, in September. Heart-centeredness in the stars. Several other events online mostly, and then really the most amazing event probably that I'm looking forward to is returning to South Africa to lead a spiritual journey with the White Lions of Timbavati. This is a shamanic journey involving both astrology and spiritual shamanism. All details are on my website. If they're not there yet, they will be soon. Thank you. And now let's focus on what actually happens in 2022. It's an interesting year because there are many changes, cycles, changings, and important planetary alignments. And one of the most significant changes is going to be the shift of the nodal axis from Gemini, Sagittarius to Taurus, North Node, Scorpio, South Node. So this is an 18-month cycle, 18 years to return to the same position, but 18 months per sign. So it's going to stay in the Taurus-Scorpio axis until the middle of July 2023. And I added some planets in this chart. As you can see, both Venus, Pluto, Uranus. And the reason is that when you look at the nodes, you're not only looking at the signs that they're in, but you also want to look at the planets that are ruling those signs. So if we speak about Scorpio, you want to look at Pluto, or if you want to look at traditional rulers, it's Mars. And if you look at the North Node in Taurus, look at Venus. So throughout the year, as you observe this axis, track the movement of Venus and what it's doing with Pluto. This year started with a Venus retrograde Pluto conjunction. So when the rulers of the nodes are connecting, doing something together, it's really important. And we will talk more about that because it's going to happen. So what is this about, generally speaking? We're moving from a more ideological, intellectual, multicultural axis of Gemini and Sagittarius, and we dealt with issues of racism, Black Lives Matter in the past year and a half. It coincided with the killing of George Floyd and everything that affected culturally. Of course, it also affected the travel issues, media issues, what is trustworthy, what kind of information we can trust. And now, as this shifts into the sign of Taurus and Scorpio, we're dealing with more practical matters. And essentially, one of the main focus is money, survival, and the economy. So we see that this year and a half coming forward, there will be a much stronger emphasis on trying to restabilize our life. And this will have to do with making changes in the financial systems, personally, collectively. But one of the important message of the North Node in Taurus, and we may or may not succeed at that, but it will be a strong calling, because when we look at this nodal axis, you can feel that the North Node is the sign that really pulls you, that you really want to feel closer to, that you want to manifest in your life. So when the North Node is in Taurus, there is a strong personal collective desire to stabilize your life, to normalize, to diminish the dramas, to have something solid, substantial, and to have some level of consistency, normalcy. So the North Node in Taurus is looking for, where is my peace, and where can I basically put my hat down and find, my land, my personal bliss. And I say it's not guaranteed that we will all manage to normalize our lives, especially following the drama of the last 2 years with the pandemic, with the economic crisis, with cultural polarization, and so forth. But with the North Node in Taurus, there's going to be more effort to try to calm down, so to speak. And if we look at the South Node in Scorpio, the South Node represents where we're coming from. So Scorpio represents the intensity of facing corruption, facing the shadows, facing the things that didn't work, that we needed to change. So Scorpio took us on a journey through everything that needed to be basically changed. So looking under every stone and trying to identify what doesn't work. Generally speaking, the South Node in Scorpio captures the collective trauma. The fact that all of us, to a degree or another, have been traumatized by insecurity, by uncertainty, by the fact that the rug was pulled from under our feet and we were suddenly, facing losses, the loss of our jobs, the loss of our health, the loss of our trust. And that's, I think, the deepest trauma, aside from physical losses, and some people even the loss of loved ones through the pandemic. I think one of the deepest trauma that the South Node in Scorpio represents is a loss of trust in the church, with all the sexual scandals, loss of trust in the banking system, loss of trust in the media, loss of trust generally in government, especially with the Pluto being in Capricorn for so many years. And then recently, so much issues of credibility and trust about the scientific and the pharmaceutical companies with vaccine, the panic and questions, and people questioning whether the earth is flat. All our scientific notions and references were also put into question to a degree or another. So the North Node in Taurus is about re-establishing something reliable, something solid, something we can build on. So it's a process of rebuilding. Scorpio South Node represents the deconstruction of all the systems. And again, the ruler Pluto being in Capricorn highlights the fact that this deconstruction is associated with Capricorn matters such as leadership, institutions, statues being toppled. And the North Node in Taurus speaks about how to rebuild something that we actually can trust. So it's not just about, okay, I need to turn down the volume, but it's also about making sure that what we're doing moving forward is going to be more reliable, consistent, solid. So that's an important message, and this will touch us, in different degrees. Each one of us just, will affect different ways of our lives. So look at what house is affected in your charts so you can understand where that need for stability and where that need for consistency will be most urgent for you. And as I said, track the movement of Venus, because Venus will tell us, what's the focus now? What is the strategy to stabilize? And we're beginning with a Venus retrograde in Capricorn. So we go back to the credibility of our institutions, the credibility of our government, of the leading figures, of authority figures, and the foundation, the skeleton, the walls that support our existence. And since Venus is retrograde, we definitely get the message that there is going to be a need to change those. So the goal to stabilize and the goal to ground ourselves will have to require reconsideration, reconstruction and doing things differently. So the retrograde factor of Venus tells us it cannot just be business as usual. We can't just go back to the old ways. Retrograde brings a need to revisit things. Later this year, and I'm going to touch on that, the North Node will conjunct with the planet Uranus, also in Taurus, and that's a big deal. But overall, as I will proceed with the other aspects of the influence of the year, even though the message is about going back to harmony, going back to a stable life, um, building stronger foundations. So even though the message is about normalizing and appreciating what we have, this year is still quite volatile. In a very different way, it's not so volatile in the confrontational aspect, maybe, but it's volatile in that it's a year of many new beginnings, and therefore it's a year where there's a lot of adventure, particularly as we move into the equinox, March, April, May, and forward. So the year begins month of January, month of February, and early March with actually a very strong contraction. Everything is shrinking. There are many, many planets in Earth signs. And by the end of January, Mars moves into Capricorn, Venus will be in Capricorn, Pluto in Capricorn, and a lot of Taurus energy. So all this Earth energy speaks about a need to consolidate, a need to be more conservative. And that means there will be tighter control on resources, on the way we do things, and even tighter control, from a governmental point of view on the economy and on vaccine and health concerns. And we can expect, as I'll touch on those next cycles, we can expect a time where, again, there will be some controversy about what makes us feel safe versus what is excessive control from a governmental point of view. So it's an interesting beginning of the year, and then the climate gradually shifts as we move into the end of March, April, May, and so forth. Things are taking a new turn, and there is a greater and greater need for expansion, for freedom, for risk, and for adventure. So we start with this contraction, with this more conservative approach, whether it's coming from countries' governmental influence, whether it's coming from our own need to be more careful, conscious. It's definitely this beginning of the year speaks about simplifying, downsizing, getting out of debt. And that's a big deal. I want to speak about debt. Since the pandemic, I think the whole world is in a massive state of debt, from individuals to governments who, had to financially support people who were unemployed following the pandemic. So all these financial assistance program, and lowering interest rates. The lowering of interest rates and the fact that people are borrowing money, getting loans and refinancing, is leading to this artificial feeling of wealth. We know that the real estate market in many, many places is out of balance. Interest rates are too low, and it creates this unrealistic, unsustainable financial situation. So if we speak about a contraction now, and if we speak about addressing financial matters with the North Node in Taurus and the ruler in Capricorn, retrograde, there will definitely be corrective measures. These corrective measures to counterbalance inflation bubbles can be measures that are implemented willingly as an act of choice, as a conscious decision to mitigate the excesses. Or it can be, again, a shocking bubble burst, a crash, financial crash of sorts. And it seems like the timing for that is not too far ahead. I'm looking at the end of February and the beginning of March with very, very dramatic alignments. As I mentioned, Venus, Mars, Pluto will all be in the sign of Capricorn. But as they move into Capricorn, they reach that critical degree, 27 degrees Capricorn, which happens to be a Mars exaltation degree. So Mars is very strong on the 27 degree of Capricorn, and Mars has to do with action, aggression, confrontation. And so it has to do with doing something about a situation. It has to do with dominance. And since it is in Capricorn, it definitely will involve, leaders and political parties locally, nationally, in each country, and internationally between countries. So this climaxes at the new moon, early March. This is basically happening March 3rd, 2022. There's a new moon conjunct Jupiter and Neptune, not too far. And there's this triple conjunction in Capricorn. So Mars and Venus represent in themselves the need for balance, the need to find an equilibrium between change and stability, between us and others, trade, prices, everything that has to do with value and cost, the cost of living, relates to Venus and Mars as well as Pluto. So we can expect that by the end of February and into the early weeks of March, that some important decisions will be made regarding the economy. Or again, if they're not made consciously, there could be events that trigger, that force and compel government to make those decisions. It could be either the beginning or the actual activation of a bubble burst financially. So there could be a feeling that things are not sustainable anymore, that interest rates are going to rise, and that the printing of money will be curbed. This is a time to act more conservatively and to watch the way we spend money, the way we create a sustainable system. At the same time, this new moon in Pisces, conjunct Jupiter, is actually very expansive. It expands everything. So we have the contraction of these planets in Capricorn, and we have the expansion of the Jupiter, Neptune, Pisces. It's kind of a double message. And this takes me to a very important theme that is specific to this year, but it's true for maybe thousands of years, especially the last 2,000 years, what we call the Pisces Age. The North Node in Taurus and Capricorn are earth signs, and they represent matter, body, physical survival, financial sustainability. And they also represent, when I speak about body, they represent physical resources, how we feed ourselves. Is food available to us? They also represent sexuality, the use of our body to reproduce and to experience pleasure. The axis of Scorpio and Taurus is not only a financial and resource axis, it's also a sexual axis. And why is that important? First of all, because as we speak about these changes and as we speak about this need to contract by the end of February and into March, we also speak about relationships, and relationships include sexuality. So this will also be a time where many relationships will be questioned and new cycles of relationships will begin. So people will have a sober look at who they're with, what they want from relationship, what are their values, a lot of questions about compatibility, about sharing values or not, and important decisions about whether we continue together or not. So a new cycle of Venus, Pluto, Mars conjunction will put relationships to test. And those who pass the test will grow stronger. It will be maybe a time where people will decide to commit, to move in together, to say yes to the next chapters of their lives, whereas others will, dissociate and feel the need to separate. And this will also happen on a global level, on a market level, alliances between countries, maybe new treaties, old treaties being challenged or severed, and new treaties being either conceptualized or implemented. So it's an important turning point. This is happening, the exact date is the 3rd of March, but it begins already in February and builds up. When I speak about Pisces, on the other hand, Pisces speaks about meaning and spirit, and the fact that our lives is not just about money, that if you have a job, it's not just to pay the bills. The job must also, make you feel like you're doing something meaningful, that you're making a difference. So you need to feel motivated, inspired. And Pisces influence represents our need to serve a greater goal and to look beyond the practicalities, to look at what we really want from our lives. What are the meanings? Why are we here? Why are we making money at all in the first place? What is our core motivation? And so what this year is about, with this strong Earth influence and then strong Piscean influence, with both the planets Jupiter and Neptune coming together, and they're both rulers of Pisces. So, it's Pisces all over. This represents a strong need for spiritual development and a strong need for financial and material security. So it's a time where both the material world and the spiritual world are activated. And the problem is that the way our society, our culture around the globe, across the board, is that there's a separation between spirit and matter. And there's a separation between spirit and flesh. Which means that in most traditions, the message is that if you are a spiritual person, you shouldn't deal with material things. You know, every message about enlightenment, whether you speak to Jesus or Buddha or other prophets, they will tell you, relinquish your attachment to physical things. You know, the promises in the kingdom of heavens. It's all about ascending, transcending. And that's the Pisces energy. That's the Pisces age, is to move beyond the physicality, the material things, the material attachment and concerns. And in some ways, it's true that life is not just about, you know, making money and buying stuff, you know, the consumerism. However, where the problem lies is that this leads to a separation. If being spiritual means that you're letting go of the material world, it also means that the material world is abandoned and that there is no spirituality in the material world. And so if you are materialistic, you cannot be spiritual. And that is a distortion. This is why also in many spiritual traditions, there are also a lot of shaming about sexual desire. Sexuality is seen as a distraction, as a corrupting influence. You know, you should, if you have sexual intercourse, it should be for procreation. You know, the idea of pleasure becomes a distraction from your spiritual development. So as I said, this is a big theme. You know, I'm talking about collective conditioning that has distorted our way we manage our lives. So how can we be materialistic and without losing our spirituality? That is the very essence of caring for the earth, of building more sustainable practices, of honoring our bodies, honoring our sexuality, honoring the trees, and eventually also honoring our food. Otherwise, what happens is that as spirituality and materialism split, you have people who are materialistic without spirituality, or you have people who are spiritual and don't have a clue about material things, or they shame it. They see it as impure. They see it as inferior. You know, bodily pleasures is a lower expression, so to speak. So there's a need to reconcile the spiritual with the material. Otherwise, the material becomes distorted. That's where you have excessive greed and the concept of never enough, you know, the bulimic consumerism of more and never enough, and feeling the void through material possessions because you never feel spiritually satisfied. And this is the crisis that we're facing, and that affects climate change, in my opinion. The fact that, you know, we We don't pay attention to the way we use resources, that no system is now sustainable, and that there's some kind of disconnect between our higher values and the way we do things, like we don't walk our talk. So this year, why am I bringing this up? This year, 2022, brings strong concerns about the physical, the material sustainability of our culture and our planet, together with a need to understand the unifying factor, the higher meaning that should direct us, and the fact that we do need to look at the material things in a more spiritual way. The other risk, if you separate spirituality from materialism, is that you can have spirituality that becomes out of touch with day-to-day life. And that's why I believe, that's my perspective, there are so many scandals in all spiritual institutions. We see the gurus falling from grace. It's the John of God abusing women. It's the one after the other, the great masters that we look up to or looked up to, that are gradually falling exactly for those things because of sexual deviations. And of course, all the sexual pedophilia scandals in the church, where in the Catholic Church, where there is also a complete denial of sexuality. And so what ends up happening is that spirituality becomes disconnected. It doesn't really address material needs, physical needs. It becomes this separate experience that's not integrated. And no wonder that people who pursue those paths end up confused, end up, caught in those distortions. So it's a potential for healing. It's a potential for us to understand how to look at things more holistically, how to understand that the material world is not evil. We don't have to be greedy. We can be materialistic in a responsible way with a consciousness that is more global and more, again, sustainable. So this applies again to the way we address nature, the way we honor women, the way we take care of our animals, everything that is about sustainability needs to be prioritized. And I believe that this is the solution to this particular chart you're looking at. Because if it doesn't happen, if the split continues, what will happen is a disconnect between what happens financially and what happens spiritually. Now, let's look back this couple of years. We had many planets in Capricorn in the year 2020, and we saw what happened. A financial crash caused by a global crisis that affected every country in the world. That was a very deep feeling of connection in a crisis. The pandemic touched everyone and affected every system. It's, I think, the first time we experienced an Earth, a simultaneous reaction that was complete. And that, of course, happened during the month of March, which is the Pisces month, where the sign of Pisces represents unity. So we were unified with the lockdowns, with the pandemic crisis in March 2020. But what happened then, as we stopped consuming, as we were locked in our houses and didn't go to work, you saw nature thriving. You saw suddenly how animals were trotting, the urban areas. So nature can recover quite quickly if we only understand it better. And so when we speak about the need to return to normal and to, build new reliable foundations, it should not just be a return to the old ways, because the old ways didn't work. What can, the risk of what can happen in 2022 in this coming months is that you will have this contraction and expansion, like a manic episode and then a crash, manic episode and crash. So massive fluctuations between wanting to be free, wanting to take risks, feeling that, there is a higher purpose, and then feeling crushed by, prices going up, loss of jobs, financial problems of one sort or another. And if we analyze the situation, when we look at those past years, we see that because people felt so contracted on a material level, and there was so much uncertainty about employment, about health, what is true, what isn't. Like we say, we're all traumatized by not knowing what to trust anymore. What is reliable? Are they fooling us, or do they know what they're talking about? So people ended up going on tangents spiritually. And that's how, movements like QAnon, completely outlandish, who made out of Trump this pedophile hero. And this guy doesn't even know why they put him in that position, because he doesn't have a clue. And so, and then you have this same movement, of course, who went wild on January 6, 2021, with the insurgency of the Capitol. And then another outlandish tangent where you had followers of this movement meeting in Dallas, Texas, where President Kennedy was assassinated, to see his deceased son, John F. Kennedy Jr., resurrect, literally, and become the vice president with Trump in 2024. I mean, this is fact. These actually happened. These people did that. They were waiting in Dallas for Junior to reappear and run for president, vice president. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing delusions. We're seeing outlandish spiritual scenarios, people clinging on to all kinds of meanings because they're so lost. They feel so insecure and nothing's reliable to them anymore. And so they cling on to nonsense, not, losing perspective. And that can happen with Jupiter, Neptune, because the need for meaning and the need for salvation creates this escape into the spiritual world, because the material world becomes so hard and difficult to cope with, I'm going to escape in my spiritual bubble, and I'm going to make up all kinds of stuff that will make me feel good and calm my spirit. It's an addiction. It's the same way as taking some, drug or intoxicating yourself. Spirituality can become an escape from when it's not integrated in the material world. And then spirituality becomes wishful thinking. It becomes, something you just indulge in to, a form of Xanax, basically, a Valium. And that's the risk here. The risk is that the material world will kind of feel so contracted that you'll feel too tight and helpless, and that you will compensate your frustration, your sense of powerlessness by, getting carried away in all kinds of spiritual beliefs. If it's integrated, on the other hand, this is the beginning. This new moon of March 3rd is going to be the beginning of an amazing awakening, spiritual awakening that is grounded, that is integrated, and that functions in the material world, so that the spiritual values are not disconnected. They are part of how we price our products, how we live with each other, how we raise our children, how we cultivate our crops, how we treat nature, animal, wildlife. So, what is also critical, this year I said has a lot of drama, is that this triple conjunction of Mars, Venus, and Pluto happens to be synchronized with the Pluto return of the United States. The United States was created in 1776, which is 246 years ago. In 2022, the 246th birthday, and that's a Pluto cycle. So for the first time in the history of the United States, Pluto will return to the natal position. The United States is experiencing in 2022 its first Pluto return. And it will happen simultaneously with Mars and Venus sandwiching it. Now we know that Mars and Pluto rule Scorpio, and Venus rule the opposite sides of Taurus and Libra. And so the Pluto return will take place all through 2022. I have written an article about it. You can look at the OPA website, OPA, opaastrology.org, or you can look at my own website, mauricefernandez.com. It's going to be in the articles section. So what happens with this Pluto return? Pluto has to do with the whole deconstruction that we've been talking about, with this scorpionic energy, looking at the shadow side, looking at the need to deconstruct in order to rebuild something of higher integrity, better, deeper values, and sustainable. This all happens in the second house, which is a financial house of the United States. So you have the financial planets in the financial house, and it affects systems, Capricorn. There are 3 Pluto returns this year. The first one is end of February. Then Pluto's going to go retrograde in July, and then it's going to go direct in December. So 3 passes. But I believe, and that's not the consensus, but I believe this first pass may be the most important one, because that's the Pluto return. That's the first time it comes back to itself. And then you have Mars and Venus with it. So my sense is that it will affect the economy, and there will be some kind of wake-up call, bubble burst. But it will not just affect the economy, it will affect systems. It will affect people in position of leadership. Even if you speak about your own bosses, or you as an authority figure, wherever, if you're a teacher, if you're a mentor, if you are a parent, if you're someone that is in a position of leadership, it is about redefining how to move forward. And it's, of course, going to expose a lot of corruption, as it has been doing for the past few years. So that Pluto is constantly digging to look for corruption. So how do we know? Pluto has been in Capricorn from 0 degrees until now, and it's going to stay into Capricorn until next year, 2023. So from 2008 until 2023, 2024, Pluto is in Capricorn. And that's what I said, this whole period between 2008 and now is when this collapse of trust has been accumulating. All institutions, from government to media, to banking, to churches, to science, everything is a big question mark. Can we trust it? Do they know what they're talking about? Where's the corruption? And we see statues falling. But what were the most critical points in those past years? Pluto was in Capricorn for 14, 15 years, will be. But every time the dispositor, the ruler of Capricorn, which is Saturn, is also in an earth sign, the contraction is more powerful. The first time was in 2008. Pluto entered Capricorn. And then Saturn was in an earth sign, Virgo. And you saw the bubble burst, the whole real estate mania crashing, because earth signs create a contraction. So every time there's an accumulation of earth signs, planets, especially, as we said, Pluto and Saturn, there's a tendency for a contraction. And so suddenly the optimism and the excesses and, the landing and the printing of bills is not working anymore. Problem is, we're not learning from mistakes, and we keep repeating. Okay, we had a crash in 2008. We bailed out the too big to fail. People lost their job, lost their homes as an effort to rebalance the overindulgence. And then 2020 hit. Pluto was in Capricorn in 2019 and 2020. And bang, another contraction, this time caused by a pandemic. And again, the whole market collapsed. And, people being laid off and bailouts. And now we're in this massive debt. So in some ways, we may say, well, Saturn is not in an earth sign anymore. Saturn is now in Aquarius. So maybe the contraction won't be as intense. I hope that's right. I hope we will be smarter. But it's interesting that as we look at this and we see the dispositor, Saturn being in Aquarius, which is the sign of technology, it's the sign of virtual reality, of the internet, and it's the sign of cryptocurrencies. this may very well be a time where the reconsideration between cryptocurrencies and regulation will hit some kind of high. It will very likely happen this year that cryptocurrencies will have to mature. It won't be able to just be, run its own course randomly or separately. We know that cryptocurrency is also, from a sustainability point of view, not fully reliable. It consumes too much energy, and it has to be revisited. It has to be in itself redirected. So Saturn being in Aquarius with Pluto in Capricorn, in the United States second house of finances, there is a strong suggestion that there will be some kind of restructuring, remodeling of the crypto world. And this will affect its value. Maybe it will stabilize it instead of, again, amplifying and gaining incredible value and then crashing, and gaining incredible value and crashing. The crypto world is very much reflecting that manic mood swing and the following crashes. So I suspect that with Saturn being in Aquarius, we will have collectively the need to manage it better. The other thing we have to be very careful about, not only in February, but throughout the year, because Saturn and Pluto are talking to each other. Saturn is the ruler of Pluto's sign in Capricorn. We are also vulnerable to all infrastructure. Infrastructure is Capricorn, being reliable on the internet only. So the virtual world becomes where we put all our assets. And if we speak again financially, beyond the crypto world, many countries are talking about eliminating physical bills. Now think about, again, science, spirituality, and materialism. That there's a need to eliminate paper bills and to have all financial transactions on, through the internet only. And of course, governments want that because that's the best way for them to track how much money is moving and what people are doing with their money. Everything that's on the internet is going to be more easily tracked. And so eliminating paper money is a way for governments to basically, control financial transactions and make sure there's no black market happening. But it's dangerous, because if we put all our eggs into this basket, the virtual world, imagine if the virtual world becomes vulnerable. We're talking about ransomware, talking about cyber attacks. As we increasingly rely on the internet, the moment we pull the plug, the moment the circuits are affected, what happens? You can't access your bank account, you can't pay for anything, and it's a disaster. So, it's the same with electricity. If the electric grid is collapsing, the economy is crashing. And we know that these are massive infrastructure that civilization is depending on. So we do need plan Bs. We do need some kind of alternative. And with Saturn being in Aquarius during this whole time, the vulnerabilities of our virtual infrastructure, the internet, our banking system, everything being online will be tested, and hopefully, succeed those tests. But this year, 2022, is going to be very vulnerable to infrastructure attacks and problem with the internet grid. So again, we're just talking about probabilities. We're not, I can't be sure of anything. I'm just describing those trends, but I'm also telling you, a sound advice is to have some money that's not online, to have some money in physical assets, going back to spirit and matter. Focus on the Taurus North Node, on having land, on having bricks, actual value, physical value, not abstract value, not artificial wealth, and not just virtual notes. So the Pluto return, I've written in my article, once again, check my website. Pluto cycles usually coincide with Neptune cycles. So as the United States goes through a Pluto return, it also goes through a Neptune opposition at the same time. And that, affects international affairs. It affects ideological issues. I don't want to get too much into it now because otherwise this video will take a whole day. But I refer to you to reading it. Now let's look at some people who maybe, we talk about authority figures and systems. Two people who just came into my mind, and there may be more. They will be, strongly involved in what's happening during these early months. And one of them is Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is born on an exact full moon at 27 Cardinal, 27 Libra, 27 Aries. And all this cluster of Pluto returning to the United States and aspecting leadership position is exactly on the 27th degree. In addition, the new moon in Pisces is going to be on her Chiron in the 10th house, which is a Capricorn house, opposing Pluto. So she will go through some kind of test. Her credibility will be questioned. Maybe she will have to step up. Some people have predicted, and I don't know if their prediction is reliable at all, but some people have said that Biden is not gonna complete his term. I don't think so. I don't think Biden is going anywhere. But I do think that she will go through some kind of test and even crisis. And it may happen on a political level where, there can be some kind of scandal, where there could be controversies that she needs to address. Or it could also be something very personal, in her personal life. Sun and moon, her family, her home. There could be changes in something that doesn't relate to her public position. But she's definitely on the radar. And we wish her well. And whatever it is, may she have the inspiration and the strength to prevail. Another person that has been quite a long time under the microscope for his involvement in the Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell affair is the British Prince Andrew, who was accused of having a relationship with an underage lady, Virginia. Forgot her last name. Sorry, Virginia. But you see that he is born with a Venus-Mars conjunction on those degrees. And so that Pluto, Venus, Mars, this isn't actually the transit for the 31st, but if you look back, the Venus, Pluto, Mars, end of February, early March, will bang, 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 will land on his natal Venus, Mars in Capricorn. And obviously, relationship issues. Capricorn has to do with ethics, has to do with being accountable for things. So Capricorn is a sign of realignment. And so they're likely, this is not going away. He's not disappearing. And he's not going to be able to keep it quiet. It seems like from February and then on, as Saturn is on his angles, and Saturn within a year will be on his sun, chances are that there will be some form of accountability that's, it's going to put a lot of pressure for him to face the accusations. So again, you can look at where that conjunction is happening. Where is 27 Capricorn in your natal chart, and see, where this need for checks and balances, this need to realign things, to revisit your relationships. Your own finances will be very important. This is a lot of knowledge. Those of you, again, who are not versed in astrology enough, or even who are, if you want a more personalized, look into this, you can, of course, schedule private consultations. So the next step in this journey is going to be the actual meeting of Jupiter and Neptune in the sign of Pisces. So earlier on, I spoke about the new moon in Pisces on March 3rd, being close to Jupiter and starting this process of spiritual development and wanting higher answers. And then the actual meeting, the actual conjunction is going to be on April 12th, 2022, the conjunction between Jupiter and Neptune. They meet, these two planets meet every 13-ish years. But this time, because it's in the sign of Pisces, is a sign that they both rule. Jupiter is a traditional ruler of Pisces. Neptune is a modern ruler. So they are in their own Piscean realm. And so the energy of Pisces is just amplified. And interestingly, as the conjunction is exact at 23 degrees, there's a repetition of 23 and 22 degrees. The sun will be 22 and a half. The nodes will be at 22 and a half. Saturn will be at 23. So it's an event that kind of creates a whole grid in the solar system. And as we said, this connection between Jupiter, Neptune, and the North Node is a challenge of combining the spiritual aspirations with practical, physical needs, the material world. So what is Jupiter, Neptune? They meet every 13 years, and this is a cycle of expansion and contraction. Why is that? Jupiter and Neptune are both representing abstract experiences. they represent the need for meaning. So they're not about washing the dishes and changing diapers. These are energies that deal more with existential concept, big picture perspective, not details. They're about the big why. Why are we here? What is the purpose of it all? And that's why there's a deep, deep spiritual reference, connection, activation when they come together. People born with Jupiter Neptune aspects are people who, like I say, cannot just do a 9-to-5 lifestyle. They will have a spiritual practice. They will need to get, deeper answers for their lives. They are seekers. So this is a combination that represents the seekers. And this is a combination that also has to do with looking for truth. What is the truth? What is the truth now? And what is the truth eternal? Is there a God? We can go back to really trying to trace the origin of our existential dilemmas through this conjunction. But because it's so abstract, it is also an energy that represents the need for transcendence, to go beyond the details of survival. And this is why it's a very adventurous combination. And it's a time of great discoveries. It's a time where we dissolve all limitations. A classic image for Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces is sailing open seas. New adventures. It's the Viking going on and sailing. It's Columbus, sailing on new oceans. And all these folks who, the Maori who left New Zealand and ended up in Hawaii. So the imagery of taking a risk, going on an adventure, and not really knowing what the destination will be is very much an act of faith, an act of trust, an act of inspiration. And this is why this conjunction is talking about. It's talking about following higher guidance, following, your intuition or something that is of higher calling. But it does say, you won't have clarity right now. Just keep going. You don't see land in sight yet, but you have to go and sail into the future. So there's an element of trust and faith and, spiritual calling. So that can be a magnificent voyage. There's magic in that. There's conviction in that. But as we say, is this going to be speaking to that North Node in Taurus that says, is it sustainable? Is it something that will create better reality for us? What is the motivation behind it? Is it just an escape? Are you just running away? Are you just sailing because you fail everywhere else and you're just packing and going every time something's wrong and you're not facing your problems? So there's a risk here of escapism and a risk here of when you confront the truth, you also have to look at the lies, look at the deception, at the disillusionment. So this will be a critical time where for some of us, it will be an absolutely unique spiritual I will call it opportunity. A time where you will have a download, where you will have, a sense of hope and a feeling that it's possible, that nothing can stop you, that it's between you and your guardian angel, it's between you and your destiny, and no one can interfere. So it is a time where, you can spread your wings. I will say, there are there's an interesting time. This conjunction was taking place in 1958. And in the summer of 1958, it was actually conjunct the North Node. So people born during the summer of 1958 have this conjunct their North Node. And these are people who are definitely driven by a spiritual calling. But what's interesting is that there were, very important people in the entertainment industry born in the summer of 58, icons such as Madonna, Michael Jackson, Prince, and those who come from the British Islands, Kate Bush, all born with this conjunction on their North Node. And they all had their spiritual, experiences, whether, Prince became a Jehovah's Witness and Madonna went to Kabbalah and whatnot. But what was really representing by their Jupiter Neptune is that they reached that iconic presence. Even if you don't like their music, you know who they are. They were so big. And so there's that expanding energy of Jupiter Neptune that is almost godlike. It's over, it's crossing all borders. It dissolves differences. And it basically created a whole new level of fame, and it's interesting that Michael Jackson died in 2009 during a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction. So he was born in the Jupiter-Neptune and died in Jupiter-Neptune. And Prince died in a Jupiter-Neptune opposition in 2016 on his nodes. So born with a conjunction on his node, dead with the opposition on the nodes. And Madonna and Kate Bush are still around. But it will be interesting to see if they release a new album, if something happens in their lives. Those who are born with the Jupiter Neptune in their natal chart, any kind of tight aspect, will of course feel that this year is going to be a milestone for them. It will be some kind of awakening, some kind of important realization. And for all of us, it will be a powerful spiritual moment. Now, what does that mean? Like, am I going to meet a new teacher? Am I going to, see the light? Am I going to be enlightened? Maybe you will. But most importantly, even people who are not spiritually inclined, this will be a time where they will say, I want to free my spirit. I want to do something that's meaningful for me. I want to let go of, being a slave to my life. I want to experience a liberation. And the danger with this conjunction is to get manic. The danger is to get carried away in these open seas and lose perspective, because you can lose orientation. If you don't know where the stars are, if you can't navigate the seas with wisdom, you get lost and you can drown. Jupiter and Neptune are energies that are so vast and so powerful that they can, another imagery that can be very practical is a surfer on a wave. And the wave is massive, but if you know how to surf, the wave will take you, and effortlessly almost, you will go very far. The universe will transport you like that wave. But if you mess up with that wave, if you're trying to control it, if you're trying to own it, if you don't listen to nature, then it will flood, it will crush you. And we have to be careful. During this time, we have to be careful about natural events. Because it could be that if we are not in tune and there is no integrity, that we experience this flood. Literally, this can be an extremely wet time where the boundaries, the protective boundaries are dissolved. And people can get lost in the abstract world, follow cultish leaders, or they can get lost when nature is not friendly anymore. So there's a risk here of natural events of different nature. It can be, as we said, floods, or it could be earthquakes, or just the contamination of water, because it's very water oriented. So there could be also problems with the infrastructure of water, poisoning, not to mention ocean pollution and plastic pollution and all of that. So, we come back to the point that there's a lot of it that's up to us. Nature responds to our intention. I learned that. I always knew that, but I saw this when I lived next to a volcano. And being in Hawaii, you could communicate with the consciousness of the volcano. And so it is here that we can communicate with the consciousness of nature, of rain, of the earth, and bring our spiritual consciousness to the physical. Another greatly important event that kind of follows the April 12 is going to be April 30th, May 1st, April 30th, where the same Jupiter Neptune is then joined by Venus. Now, this is a feat for several reasons. First of all, physically, Venus and Jupiter are the brightest lights in the sky. So they will come so close together, even by declination, that the whole week around April 30th, you're going to have a spectacle in the skies of two of the brightest lights coming together. It's going to happen at before sunrise. So this is the sun, this is the horizon. Just before sunrise, go out on April 30th and look at these bright lights, and definitely sit down on your knees and celebrate and pray and connect with a blessing. It's a blessing. It's a very benevolent energy. It's an energy of peace. It's an energy of hope. It's an energy of expansion, of protection, of spiritual protection. This happens to be also 27 degrees Pisces is a Venus exaltation degree. So the Venus is on its exaltation degrees conjunct Jupiter. And earlier on, we saw Mars on its exaltation degree, 27 Capricorn. So, is it all positive? Does that mean that we will be saved from all the problems of the world? It's a moment of grace, and it is a moment to celebrate. Now, it happens to be that April 30th is also a solar eclipse in the sign of Taurus, and Venus is the ruler of Taurus. Whew. Everything here is interconnected between, again, the Taurus physical, practical, financial, sensual, and the spiritual. So we always have to examine what the risks are, because even if it is a protective energy, there's always a shadow side. Nothing in astrology is all good or all dark. With Venus, Jupiter being on that degree and this extraordinary visual experience that we will have, I invite you, to be in ceremony during that time. And we will organize, we have organized our conference, iAstrologer, in Arizona for this weekend of the Jupiter-Venus conjunction to celebrate together as a community, as astrologers. Check it out. What are the risks of this? The same risk as too much sugar in your coffee. Jupiter and Neptune can represent excessive indulgence. If people are born with that, they risk not having boundaries. They risk excesses in general. Too much of anything, even if it's a good thing, can become detrimental. So it's a time where we do need to pay attention to our escapism and to wanting to sugarcoat things too much. But otherwise, it's unique. The month of April, from the middle into the end of April, with all its risks for bubble bursts and disillusionment, at the core is a month where there is a tremendous healing power. And I ask you, all of us, to really set our intention for this time, to use astrology for higher purposes, for spiritual purposes, and to utilize these alignments to bring healing on this planet. We all have been through a lot. There's a great deal of suffering because of the tremendous changes, but even beyond those last year changes, it is a time where we need to restore trust, and where we need to restore proper leadership, and we need to unite spirit with matter and build sustainable systems. So, for the well-being of everyone, I invite you to celebrate these alignments, to mark, the Taurus eclipse, April 30th, in your calendars, and to do something special. Maybe indeed join us in Arizona. So we're moving, after this period of time, to a different climate. Jupiter, communes with Venus at the end of April, 1st of May, and then it moves forward, galloping into the sign of Aries. And the energy again shifts completely. However, there's a natural continuation. When Jupiter in Pisces with Neptune and Venus was all about spreading our wings and sailing those open seas and taking on new adventures and thinking, bringing healing energy and not compromising on on our truth. As it moves into Aries, it's time to act upon those feelings. Now, this may be a time where you receive money. This may be a time where someone comes and supports you. This may be a time where you get a financial opportunity or where you meet a special person in your life. But then as Jupiter moves into Aries, you see Mars is not far, and Mars moves at the same time into Aries. And by the end of May, we have a Mars-Jupiter conjunction with Chiron not far off in Aries. And Jupiter will stay in Aries for several months. Jupiter is still very close to the Sun relative in its cycle, and therefore it moves faster than ever through the signs. Usually Jupiter stays 13 months in a sign, and here you see that it's moving in and out of Aries, retrograding back to Pisces in just 5 months. So it's at its perihelion. What does that mean to us? May 29, Jupiter conjuncts Mars, the ruler of Aries. So you see that Jupiter here, April 12, conjuncts Neptune, the ruler of Pisces. It meets the ruler of Pisces in Pisces, then it meets the ruler of Aries in Aries. These are two critical dates, April 12 to May 29. Now, what is Jupiter in Aries? It's an energy that's untamable. Fire signs are usually associated with big cats, but Aries and Jupiter in Aries is with a cheetah, because the cheetah is the fastest running cat and it sprints. It's very fast for short periods of time. And this is actually the image of a female cheetah who I believe was called Sarah. And she was the fastest cheetah ever recorded. So Jupiter, Mars in Aries, speed of light. What does that mean to us? It's a time, again, where you will want your voice heard. Jupiter is loud. In Aries, Jupiter is very loud. And it's uncompromising. Many people will use this opportunity to reinvent their lives. This is a time of great courage. Remember, it's the year of the tiger. The year of the tiger is a year of courage. It's daring. It's adventurous. So every time a planet moves into Aries, especially the zero cardinal, here both Mars and Jupiter in Aries, you have this opportunity to cut from the past and to start a new chapter in your life, a new job, a relocation, whatever it is. It's a new chapter. There will be a change of guard. There will be a rotation in your life, the old versus the new. And that is new, fresh energy. So this is very entrepreneur-like. We know that many people have been displaced, have been laid off during the pandemic and are in this process of reinventing themselves, starting new businesses, starting new vocations. this is when the activation for this new chapter and this new direction is really at its maximum, at its climax. So it's definitely a time for spreading your wings, taking risks, and thinking later. It's exciting. It's enthusiastic. It's powerful. It's Mars, Jupiter is like, you see this animal is very much like a bulldozer. Nothing can stop you. And you will feel drawn, called to make those decisions. Very likely, you will disengage from previous commitment because Mars will sever ties and say, I don't want to be in this job anymore. I don't want to do that anymore. So it's a time where you say no to something and you engage in something else. And in a typical Aries way, you move into something new and you have to, see if the past that you're leaving behind is really completely resolved. But that's a tale for another time because I don't have, we're going to stay again hours here talking about this. If you need personal guidance, as I mentioned, you can contact me. But generally speaking, it's a time where you can move forward. Now, one of the things that can also happen during Jupiter and Mars is a lot of protest. If things are not working properly, in the month prior, if there's too much oppression, if there are too many, corruption or feeling of inconsistencies that trigger the collective, this can be a time again of massive protest. The last time Jupiter was in Aries was 2010, 2011. And that was a time of massive protests, Occupy movements. It was following the 2008 crash. 2 years later, people not wanting to take the bullshit anymore. And so it is now, 2 years after 2020. If things are not, restored to a place of integrity and trust, this Jupiter in Aries can create, again, people hitting the streets, people feeling that they want to change in policy, they want a change of direction. It is very flammable. So in 2010-11, there was also a massive revolution in North African countries and the Middle East. And up to date, Syria has been involved in a massive civil war as a result of this time. So it was kind of a cascade of events that led to the protests. And rulers being toppled after decades in power, like they lost their power, unexpectedly and rapidly. So there were obviously other factors back in 2010. We had a Saturn-Uranus opposition. Now we have a Saturn-Uranus square. So there are parallels, but there are also different circumstances. So let's see what happens. But as far as you're concerned, know that the end of May and into the summer of the Northern Hemisphere summer, the month of July and August, it's a time of incredible creativity, taking charge of your destiny, moving forward with new dreams, new projects, and questioning, what is the next chapter of your life? So it can be a change, but it's, change can also be scary, but at the same time, it's a feeling of liberation. You are releasing a wild animal inside of you and letting that animal roam free, run free. So visualize that. The last station that I'm going to talk about in this video is going to be the end of July 2022. July 31st is going to be the exact time where Uranus conjuncts the North Node, and it happens to be conjunct Mars as well. Wherever you have Mars, you have volatility. Wherever you have Mars, you have flammable material, change, anger, protest, agitation, separation, and good sex. So Mars is intense, and it brings the intensity wherever it is. So where is it now? It's going to be on that North Node. We talked about the North Node in Taurus being about, the material needs, food, sexuality, and financial systems, financial sustainability, management of resources. With Uranus on the North Node, it's a time to redefine our way of thinking. So Uranus brings innovation. Uranus brings elevation. What do we elevate here? We elevate our consciousness. Uranus wants the higher mind, wants to look at things from a higher perspective. This is why Uranus represents innovation, because it brings more objectivity to whatever field we're talking about. And here, it's the field of resources. So this is a time to restructure, to innovate our financial institutions, to innovate our ways of income. Uranus in Taurus may mean that you will want to elevate, upgrade the way you make money. It can be a financial opportunity for you, whether it comes to you or whether you create it. With Mars there, again, there can be an element of protest, an element of confrontation. We are again going back to the risk of cyber attacks on financial systems and infrastructure. This, in the following days after, in early August, will square Saturn. So it is a volatile time, but it's a time of also incredible creativity. It's interesting that Uranus on the North Node coincides with major breakthroughs in civilization. New thoughts, new discoveries, going to new planets, medical breakthroughs. Now, this can, because it's in Taurus, we can also see Uranus has to do with technology, with the computer and virtual world, internet, and machinery. So it may very well be that this is also a time where there is more medical breakthrough in balancing our biology, Taurus, with technology, Uranus. Some will say they're going to implant us with microchips. Possible. But at a higher level, it's about using technology to improve physical function. So there's always the shadow side, and the shadow side can be food engineering, can be body engineering, can be mind control. The positive side is, having knee replacements, having technology restore physical well-being, and using technology to enhance your brain, to enhance any kind of physical function. It's also interesting that Uranus represents space and Taurus represents Earth and resources. So there may also be thoughts or progress towards using resources from asteroids, mining asteroids. This echoes the movie Don't Look Up, which is all about mining asteroids. If you're on Netflix, it's quite recommended. But there's a positive thing to mining asteroids, and that if it's done ethically, properly, it can alleviate the burden on planet Earth. We need to think about ways to do things sustainably, and hopefully to bridge between socioeconomic gaps. So these are options, these are things that could happen. We go back again to financial institutions to see what happens with the cryptocurrencies, etc. Another thing that coincides with Uranus on the North Node is changes in the astrology world. Many cultural development happen in the field of astrology when Uranus is on the North Node. That happened in the end of the 70s with a strong movement of psychological astrology, karmic astrology, many important books being released in the 77 era. Then in 1991 and 2, you had Uranus in Capricorn on the North Node, and a return to the traditions of astrology, to ancient texts that were translated, and a revival of Capricorn traditions, ancestral influences. So now in Taurus, it may very well mean that astrology is going to bridge new financial markets, that astrology is going to be more and more a viable full-time profession, and that there will be new opportunities, financial opportunities for astrologers to connect sky and earth. And this is why, again, the conference iAstrologer can be a game changer, can be an opportunity to really make a difference in the way the field of astrology moves forward, and how we maintain or improve our standards. This is going to be a conference about marketing, about ethics, about, polishing our consulting skills. So about being professional as astrologers. And this combination, matched with Uranus on the North Node, shows a lot of promise. So a lot more to talk about, and I'm going to meet you, in the following months, probably with shorter videos about the cycles of the times. I hope you understand, the themes that we're talking about. I'm just going to review some of the milestones of these first part of the year. The major milestones is this triple conjunction in Capricorn on the Mars exaltation degree in March 3rd, the contraction, already bubble bursting. Something happens with the economy and with alliances and with leaders. The second one is the Jupiter-Neptune in Pisces, focusing on the spiritual, the adventurous, the freedom of spirit, and the risk with both for natural events. Following that, the unleashing of the beast, with with Mars, Jupiter in Aries, the the no way back, the release of the wild side, and the desire to not compromise on our truth anymore. Very freeing energy. And then, I forgot to mention, along with Jupiter, Neptune, we have Jupiter, Venus on the eclipse on April 30th, which is a time of ceremony, a time of blessing, a healing, and benevolence. Then in the summer in the north, winter in the south, Uranus, Mars on the north node, earth shaking, issues about change in the agricultural, in the financial, in the medical world, and important cultural and scientific developments. Now, if you look at all these placements, we see a lot of very expansive energy. So the year starts with this contraction, and then gradually the expansion, the changes, the revolution, the freedom of spirit, so to speak, ensues. And I can bet that there will be a lot of voyages to new frontiers, whether it's in space, whether it's in spiritual worlds, whether it's in financial opportunities. It's an exciting year. But, in our aim to restore normalcy, we see that the energy is loose. So we're not going to just go back to normal. There's a lot of adventure and a lot of newness that needs to happen. So, as Jupiter, Venus teaches us, if that's something to hear, is yes. Say yes to life. Say yes to what's in front of you. And here's another, illustration looking at totem animals during this period of time. The mountain goat, the natural Capricorn, finding balance in extremely complex situation and high altitude, aiming high, but risking so much if you're not cautious. So it's a very ambitious energy, but it's also an energy that requires tremendous caution, discipline, and control. Following that, the Venus, Neptune, Jupiter, we see this, the blessing of the dolphin that always smiles, even when they're sad, they're smiling, and the colorful nature, the benevolent nature of the dolphin. And then in May, as Jupiter moves with Mars, it's go, breakthroughs, changes, protest, not anymore trying completely new ventures and daring. It's a daring energy. And like I said, it's loud. So this is a beautiful creative energy, but there is also a risk of ideological madness, like people getting carried away with their beliefs. There can be, people with all kinds of messianic complexes going out of control. And then later in July, the focus on changes in the financial world and connecting the financial with new development, new systems. If you're interested, learning more about my work, these 2 books I've authored, check them out. Private consultation or education. If you want to study astrology seriously, we have diploma programs. And going back to this year's schedule, online programs, on location programs. If you want a spiritual journey, we'll have more details about that. If you are interested in this beautiful conference, Heart-Centeredness in the Star and Omega in September, and of course, iAstrologer. Thank you, everyone, and many, many blessings for the year of the Water Tiger. Many roars and protection and healing for the world. Amen. Thank you.